It's like a never-ending nightmare, even with Mike Macdonald now as the head coach and bringing his defense to the table. The Seahawks continue to struggle defending the run. What gives, and is there a quick solution this time around heading into Thursday's game against the 49ers? We'll be breaking it all down here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined, as always, here for our Monday episode by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s out there, whether you're in Cheney, Washington, or Auburn Hills, Michigan. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. The Seahawks falling to 3-2 with a disappointing 29-20 loss to the Giants yesterday. We're going to have our Monday musings, our in-depth takeaways after rewatching the film. And we got to quickly turn the page because there's another game coming up on Thursday night. We'll have our first look at the San Francisco 49ers, among other things, in a loaded Monday episode brought to you by our friends over at LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. Terms and conditions apply. Now for your lead story here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. It's fitting, Rob, that we are in the month of Halloween when we are talking about Seattle's run defense, because it is a nightmare that has continued to plague this team, even with a new coaching staff, Mike Macdonald's system coming to town, some of the additions that were made in the draft and in free agency. We got to see a couple games where the run defense was solid, but for the most part, it's been more of the same. In fact, in the last 4 weeks, the Seahawks would be 26th overall in rushing yards allowed, and they would be tied for the second worst, giving up 5.1 yards per carry. This is not what we were envisioning with Mike Macdonald coming to town, and yet that's where we're at. You certainly can look at the injuries, but Rob, watching the end zone tape, the all-22, revisiting the film from yesterday, the Detroit game last Monday night as well, there are some clear systemic issues. There's fundamental issues that are plaguing this team right now that are similar and yet somewhat different from what we've seen the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think that Mike Macdonald kind of mentioned this in his post-game press conference, and his radio hits that he has done since this loss, and he basically is attributing this to first off, just kind of acknowledging, hey, give the Giants some credit. Their offensive line played well. Daniel Jones is a mobile quarterback, presents an awful lot of difficult matchups for any club, and I think you certainly have to give a great deal of respect to Tyrone Trace, who averaged 7.2 yards per carry, just a unfathomable number. You mentioned, I mean, it's Halloween. I'm wearing some orange here for Halloween, but honestly, I thought it was almost more like December, like it was Christmas. I mean, Seattle was giving them some gifts at this point with the different openings that were available to them. There was just so many just free runs into the second level before Tyrone Tracy even had breath on him. So again, that to me is the most concerning thing. I saw a little bit about of that the week before against the Detroit Lions. That's one of the reasons why I was so concerned about this, because and characterize this as an absolute trap game for the Seahawks. To me, this was a game, Corbin, where I thought that the Seahawks basically walked in like they were the headliner, and that their opening act just failed to show up, and then they suddenly got pushed onto the stage and didn't know what the hell was going on until they were already down. And so to me, that is the most concerning aspect about this game, is that this does not feel like a run defense that is going to just suddenly magically click and be able to be effective. And considering the fact that you have the divisional rival in the San Francisco 49ers, who basically can put out anybody at the running back position and be very successful, and they don't just have anybody at running back position. Jordan Mason is number 2 in all of the NFL in rushing yards so far in this early season. And then, I think there's a great deal of concern for the Seahawks and for their fans about, is this run defense ever going to improve? But if not, then is this 3-0 start that had so many of us excited, is this going to wind up being a little bit of a month of nightmares, as you mentioned before, with this being the Halloween season?
Yeah, it's making that 3-0 start look like it was a mirage. And it's 2 games, and we have seen letdowns in the past, and the Seahawks have been able to bounce back. But this is a new coaching staff, a first-time head coach. We don't know how everything is going to come together with this adversity. We haven't had a chance to see this happen to this point. And when you're trying to diagnose this defense, there's a few things that jumped out. And I will admit, I asked Mike Macdonald today about the edge guys, because watching the game live yesterday, it felt like that was a significant issue for the Seahawks. And there were a couple plays that jumped out to me where it seemed like Tyrone Tracy was just able to get untouched to the outside, and there wasn't anybody that was stopping him from doing it. And Macdonald made sure to point out, look, this is not just on the outside linebackers, the edge guys. That wouldn't be fair to them. We're having issues with our force players not coming up and making plays and missing tackles. And it's a 3-level thing. It's every part of the defense. And going back and watching the all 22 after the press conference today, I had not had a chance to watch that angle, watching the end zone angle. It was apparent that first half, it was more about the edge guys. The second half, the busted runs, the force players were not there, and there were some other issues that were going on. But clearly, last 2 games, we have seen several plays where running backs have been able to get out of contain. That is the first thing that the Seahawks have got to figure out how to fix. And not having Uchenna Nwosu last more than 20 plays certainly is going to hurt from that regard, because he is your best run defender at that position. There's a major drop-off after him. Even if the group has been better to this point, there's still a lot of plays being left on the field. And the other thing that's concerning is the number of plays where we are seeing more than one defender end up in the same gap. That should not be happening. And I understand this is still a relatively new defense for a lot of these players, but still, you're 5 games in now. This should not be happening. And there was a 29-yard run that Tracy had in yesterday's game that Tyrell Dodson and Leonard Williams, and you could make an argument, Jaron Reed, I think Reed was doing what he was supposed to do, but Williams got collapsed down to the A gap from a double team. And that same A gap, you had Dodson, and then Reed was right there. They had 3 guys that were basically blocked by 3 guys right there, but they got clustered in that spot. And then there was a gaping wide hole in the B gap there because they didn't have their run fits taken care of. To me, that is the biggest issue. And off the edge, it's been a real problem with their force players. But you add in the fact that they haven't been tackling. And then, oh, by the way, here's where the philosophical stuff comes into play. The Seahawks have been running a lot of 2 high safety looks, which means you don't have that second safety down in the box to help out. They're getting out-gapped a lot by teams. I mean, the Lions were purposely putting multiple tight ends in the field in line and saying, all right, if you guys aren't going to drop that safety down, we're just going to create a couple of gaps, and now you can't cover all these gaps. And they were running the football at will, particularly in the first half. The Giants had the mobile quarterback element to add to this. The 2 high safety look, if you have the right guys and everybody's playing well, you can get away with that. But right now, there's a lot of run plays where there are at least 1 or 2 gaps that are not accounted for, and that is like stealing candy from a baby for an NFL offense.
No, it really is. And of course, the Seahawks have used some 3 safety looks as well. And that looks great on paper. But when you are playing against a team that was as physical as the New York Giants were from the absolute jump of this football game, then a 3 safety look, a 2 high look with 2 safeties, when you have an inside linebacker in Jerome Baker, who actually led the Seahawks in tackles in this game and made some nice plays, but still, he's 220 pounds soaking wet. The Seahawks lack size and physicality, at least in this game, at the inside linebacker position. That's something I'm going to be kind of talking about here a little bit later. But I do think that is something that has to be acknowledged in why Seattle was, basically as leaky on run defense as they were in this football game. And one of the reasons why I have some concerns moving forward. I do agree with what you were saying, however. I think that just the run gap integrity, it just felt like there was an awful lot of confusion on the defensive side of the ball. And that is something that Mike Macdonald is considering where his expertise lies. That is something that has got to be very concerning for him. And of course, the fact that this is, again, a very, very short week, and you are going to be going up against arguably the best running team, at least from the last 5, 6, 10 years perspective, the best running team in all of the NFL. So again, this is a huge concern for the Seahawks.
The only thing that's working for them here is that Mike Macdonald has coached a lot against Kyle Shanahan, even dating back to when Shanahan was an offensive coordinator in Cleveland. So he has coached against him. He has seen the evolution of Kyle Shanahan's offense. And the Seahawks, this is my opinion from yesterday. I felt like the interior defensive line played fine. I do not think that that was the issue for the most part. I have concerns about where the linebackers' heads are at in terms of the run fits, the corners, the safeties, and the too high looks that are creating some of these conflicts. So those are the things they're going to have to get to. The positive side is I think these are all fixable. These are all issues that I think can be addressed. The question is, are you going to be able to get it addressed quick enough that we're going to see it play out in the field and things are going to start translating? Because right now, that is not what we're seeing. We're seeing the same mistakes happening over and over again. And then you compound that with some of the injuries, the new faces in there, communication issues. And that's why you give up 175 rushing yards to a team that ranked 30th in rushing offense going into this game. And certainly it is a major concern. When we come back, there's plenty more to tackle. We've got our Monday musings, our in-depth all-22 look at what transpired at Lumen Field yesterday in an ugly loss to the Giants. We'll get to that coming up next here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to have as many top-tier candidates as possible to interview. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. As a site manager for Seahawks on SI, LinkedIn Jobs is my go-to to post writing positions to land top candidates. The process is made easy and seamless. And LinkedIn isn't just another job board. It's a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals. They make it so easy that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. And LinkedIn knows small businesses are wearing many hats and might not have the time or resource to hire. That's why they have all these cool features they've come out with, including a recent feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Locked On Seahawks is also sponsored by BetterHelp. What's the first thing you do if you had an extra hour in your day? For me, I wish I had a little bit more time to lift weights. The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. And therapy can help you find what matters to you so you can do more of it. BetterHelp Online Therapy will assess your needs and can match you with your own licensed professional therapist in less than 48 hours. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient. It's flexible and it's best suited to your schedule. Just fill out a questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists for any time at no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. That's 10% off your first month of online therapy at betterhelp.com/lockedon. Welcome back to the Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s out there tuning in. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. A rough one for the Seahawks at Lumen Field on Sunday. The first loss for Coach Mike Macdonald on his home turf. A 29-20 upset loss at the hands of the New York Giants, who, as we just talked about, Rob, they ran for 175 yards in this game. And this was a team that was missing their starting running back. They were ranked 30th in yards, 32nd in yards per attempt on the ground going into this game. And yet you would have think that the Seahawks ran into O.J. Simpson in his prime with the Buffalo Bills, or ran into LaDainian Tomlinson. That's what they made Tyrone Tracy look like yesterday. But nonetheless, there were a lot of other factors in this game that led to the Seahawks losing, aside from just the fact their run defense played poorly for most of the afternoon. And this is your first opportunity to weigh in on what you saw in this game. And I know there's one thing in particular with the NFL that you'd like to discuss here.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that we know the NFL stands for National Football League, of course. And years ago, there was a very good coach, Jerry Glanville, who kind of popularized the saying, the NFL stands for not for long when you make play calls like that. It was caught on NFL films. I thought it was kind of a comical statement. But I would argue that that at least from the Seahawks perspective, and the way that they played yesterday, that NFL could basically stand for no, finesse. Excuse me, no finesse loses. And that's really the point here, is that it seemed like every alternative that the Seahawks had, every adjustment that they had, was to get more finesse, whether it be with Geno Smith dropping back essentially 4 times as many times as the Seahawks ran the football, or the different blitzes that they ran with sending more linebackers, more safeties, but not necessarily loading the box up with bigger players. I think that to me, what this says is that this is a Seahawks coaching staff that has been very good at basically manipulating matchups and not necessarily having the physicality and the size that is going to be required at the NFL level. And so I think that it's helpful that this happened when it did early in the season, because as you said earlier, Corbin, I think that the Seahawks do have the time and the bodies to be able to be successful and kind of turn this around. But right now, here now, physicality matters. Finesse does not win. I think that's the kind of the mentality the Seahawks have got to kind of adopt here, is they've got to get meaner and nastier and tougher at the line of scrimmage. And that is something that Mike Macdonald has always done. Certainly that was one of the calling cards of the Baltimore Ravens, but that was absolutely missing in this last week's performance against the New York Giants, and frankly against the Detroit Lions as well.
And the Lions game, you had all the injuries. So what I think a lot of people, including myself, were like, look, they'll get Leonard Williams back. They'll get Byron Murphy, the second back, eventually. Like, this is not going to be something that's going to be a long-term issue, because we did see the physicality in those first 3 games. That was probably the thing that I was most encouraged by, was the physicality we saw in those 3 straight victories to open the season. But now you see this Seahawks team, as I said yesterday on the postgame show, coming out flatter than a burned pancake. That's what they did on defense in particular. They didn't look like they were ready to play. They looked disinterested at times. Even after a 102-yard fumble return, I thought that was going to wake the Seahawks defense up. They did get a stop the next drive, but then they lulled right back into it. When you're not ready to play, it's so hard to turn that light switch on, especially when you're playing the best players in the world. I want to look at the offensive side of the football for just a moment. And those that listened to the postgame show yesterday, my opinion on the pass-run distribution. I think at this point, Mike Macdonald has probably heard what I've said, because today he kept bringing up, I know what you guys are going to ask. You're going to talk about the run game. Look, it's going to continue to be talked about, because right now, Ryan Grubb's system is not helping this offensive line grow. This is not a group that is going to come together if you are throwing the football 88% of the time, because that's what it would have equated to yesterday if Geno Smith didn't take off and run a few times. They called pass plays on 88% of their offensive snaps. You can't do that in the NFL. Teams have tried to do that. It is a tried and true formula for failure when you try to do that. I don't care how many good receivers you have. I don't care how good your quarterback is. There's got to be some semblance of run game, but I think they are doing their linemen a disservice. I mean, I think Laken Tomlinson and Anthony Bradford and Christian Haynes, even Connor Williams, those guys want to be able to fire out of their stance and run block. And I know some are going to say, well, they had 2 runs for 2 yards. It wasn't working. That's 2 runs. You got to keep it going. That is not a big enough sample size to be able to get anything rolling. You got to get your offensive linemen into a rhythm. And I don't think you can do that dropping back to throw 88% of the time. I didn't like the game plan yesterday in that regard, not getting number 9 more involved. But it really boils down to that offensive line, and you're asking them to block Brian Burns and Dexter Lawrence and Kayvon Thibodeau. You're asking them to pass protect 88% of the time. Like, you are asking for failure in that situation, and ultimately gave up 7 sacks because of that. Rob, I just don't think that this system, the way it is operating right now, Ryan Grubb's got to make adjustments, not only for them to be successful putting points to the board, but if you want this offensive line to start turning the corner and get better, do something to help them a little bit, and this is not helping them.
It's not helping them, and I 100% agree with what you're saying there. I also think that the problem lies on the defensive side of the ball at the linebacker position. And look, I was kind of being silly for the NFL staying for now finesse loses. I think you can make the argument again that at the inside linebacker position, Seattle has a couple of players, and including their starters, and Tyrell Dodson wears number 0, Jerome Baker wears number 17. Those are not traditional linebacker numbers, and they didn't play traditional downhill Mike Macdonald type of defense in this performance against the New York Giants either. I think that Tyrell Dodson wearing number 48. I mean, frankly, Drake May, who happens to wear number 42, to me, Drake Thomas, number 42, he's the most instinctive linebacker that's on this squad. He might be the most physical linebacker that's on the squad. How didn't he get onto the field when Seattle was giving up run plays again, like a Halloween trick-or-treater is giving away candy? I mean, this just felt like a game where Seattle had to adjust on the fly. It felt like, as Mike Macdonald said, they were out prepared, they were out executed, they were outperformed in every single way in which you could imagine in this football game. And again, I 100% agree with you as far as the struggles along the offensive line. I think that the inside linebacker position was definitely something that was a huge struggle for the Seahawks in this particular game. And kudos to the Giants. They recognized it, they attacked it, and they beat the Seahawks in the trenches.
Yeah, I agree with you on the linebacker take. And look, we have our disagreements with how Pro Football Focus does their grades. I don't know that there is a position that I have a wider gap between what I see and what they see, because Tyrell Dodson and Jerome Baker were their 2 highest graded players. Now, I thought Jerome Baker made some splashy plays early in this game. He had the forced fumble, obviously, but he also had a tackle at the line of scrimmage the play before forcing that fumble. There was a couple other times he chased Daniel Jones around. So I'm not going to say there weren't some good plays, but there were also a number of plays where both the linebackers were out of position. They weren't handling their run fits. They weren't strafing to the football. They weren't staying squared up, which Mike Macdonald has hammered home how important that is for him, staying square versus the run. They weren't doing that, and they were caught guessing several times too. So there's some concerns for me at that position. And look, Tyrese Knight didn't play a single snap on defense or special teams yesterday. That should not be happening. He has got to get some snaps. I'm sorry. At least on special teams, the dude's got to play. And from all accounts, he was healthy enough to play in this football game. He was dressed. He was on the sideline. I've got issues with that. You have 2 guys that are veterans on one of your contracts. Tyrese Knight played pretty well the last 2 weeks. Give the rookie some bones. You got to get him on the field, especially when they were struggling to defend the run. That's a calling card for Tyrese Knight. Let him get downhill and thump some people. I was shocked that he did not get any run in yesterday's game. Real quick, my last Monday musing, and you and I were in agreement on this before the show. That blocked field goal at the end of the game, that really epitomized the way that this entire game unfolded for the Seattle Seahawks. And in particular, for one reason, Mike Macdonald has brought this up time and time again since the game ended. It was a technique-related issue up front. How many issues did they have yesterday that were fundamental related, whether it was in pass protection, having issues whiffing on guys or getting caught leaning, or on defense, not handling your run fits, or on special teams, not handling your blocking duties on kicks the way that you're supposed to. This looked like an undisciplined team that was not fundamentally sound in any phase of the game, which we didn't see that earlier in the season. And so the fact that that ended up blowing up in their face there when I had a chance to tie the game, it really was a fitting end to this football game, because that is why the Seahawks were in that position where they were trying to tie a game against a team they should have beat handily. It's going to blow up in your face, and you can't blame the game on that kick being blocked. It was the technique stuff, the fundamental issues, the assignment issues throughout the game that ultimately undid this team.
Corbin, I think even the most passionate, optimistic Seahawks fan would have agreed that if the Seattle would have won that game, that they would have stolen a victory. The Giants beat them up and down the field in their home stadium. And so for Seattle to have possibly even won that game, I mean, much less just to, get the field goal to send it potentially to overtime, they didn't deserve to win. So that's the reason why I believe that blocked field goal kind of epitomized Seattle's efforts, is that they again were outperformed, they were out physicaled. The excuse is basically that this was, this should have been called a penalty. I mean, toughen up, my goodness. I mean, this somebody who's just kind of complaining that they just hit us too hard. It was like, what the heck? I mean, is this football or is this not? And that to me was the most disappointing fact. Yep. Disappointing aspect of this game is not only did you lose, but then you wanted to cry to the refs after you lost, after they were meaner and nastier than you were. I mean, that again, to me, is the most troubling thing I've seen so far this season, is that the Seahawks got more physical at home by an inferior opponent, at least on paper, a team that wanted it more. That's why Geno Smith was so angry. When they asked him out in his post-game press conference, what was the positive? He's like, well, we woke up today. Well, we woke up today as well, thankfully. And that's the thing, is the Seahawks have got to be waking up better and in more of a mindset of actually winning football games if they want to have any success against 49ers, or frankly, any other NFL team that's going to come down the line as the season goes on.
I thought Geno Smith was the only player from start to finish that looked like he was ready to play and was ready to fight, to be honest with you. I think that a lot of fans were saying, well, he could have done more. Did you see the pass protection? Did you see the fact that, and I asked him about the run game stuff, and he's like, well, I don't think about that during the game. I got to do what the coach tells me to do. I got to run the plays that are called in. But it almost felt like Geno was kind of biting his tongue a little bit there. Like, give me a little bit of support. Give me a run game a little bit so we can get play. I mean, they never call play action, in part because the Giants weren't going to bite on it yesterday. And why would they? They never ran the football. So I already went off on this yesterday, so I'm not going to go on that tangent again. But I think Geno Smith, you can tell why he was upset, and understandably, it felt like he was fighting in this game, and there were a lot of guys that just didn't. It just didn't feel like that fight was necessarily there, at least until second half, when it ended up being too little, too late. When we come back, we got a new game to start getting ready for, because guess what? The Seahawks are back in action in like 10 minutes. We got a Thursday night game coming up against the 49ers. We're going to take a look at what's new with the 2-3 San Francisco 49ers. That'll be coming up next here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. When you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. You can bet on everything from DK Metcalf scoring the first touchdown against the 49ers on Thursday night to A.J. Barner being the first player in Monday's game with a 30-plus yard reception. Just throw in a $5 bet and you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Visit FanDuel.com today and download America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to the Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s who are listening in. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Believe it or not, we got to already start previewing our next game, because it is coming up in just a couple days. Thursday night football against the San Francisco 49ers. A familiar opponent, and yet, Rob, there's going to be some new faces out there, in part because the San Francisco 49ers, the Seahawks want to complain about injuries. Look at the 49ers injury list. They have not had Christian McCaffrey this entire season. They will not have him on Thursday night as he continues to deal with an Achilles injury. Javon Hargrave, one of their top defensive linemen, he is out for the rest of the season on injury reserve. They haven't had Dre Greenlaw the entire season. There's a number of other players that have been in and out of the lineup that either on injury reserve or the PUP list. So this is a team that's been decimated by injuries, and the record they have at 2-3 in part has been impacted by the fact that they have had players in and out of the lineup. Deebo Samuel missed time. George Kittle missed a game. So look, Seahawk fans, you can't sit there and make excuses. Look what the 49ers have been dealing with. Both these teams have had their share of injuries, but certainly some different players that will be on the field for the 49ers on Thursday night that either the Seahawks may or may not be familiar with.
Yeah, and I think that's where you have to start the conversation here is just even though the 49ers may have some different numbers out there, that the production remains the same. And again, as we talked about before, Jordan Mason, is second in the NFL in rushing yards. So it's almost as if they have Christian McCaffrey in the backfield, or at least a back that is being very similar to productive. Now, he is not proven to be nearly as effective as a receiver out of the backfield, but as a a runner, this is a slashing kind of a guy, very similar to Tyrone Tracy, who was very effective against the Seahawks, as well as Jahmyr Gibbs, who, of course, a week before the Detroit Lions was also very effective. And while you can see the additions and departures here, if you're watching on YouTube, quickly additions being Leonard Floyd, the edge rusher, Devondre Campbell, the inside linebacker, Malik Collins, the big defensive tackle, Yatura Gross-Matos, another pass rusher, Joshua Dobbs replaced Sam Darnold, who, of course, has been a star for the Minnesota Vikings so far. This is a San Francisco 49ers squad that kind of continues to just basically be very effective and in their own different way. And to me, one of the huge differences, you mentioned the fact that Deebo Samuel has missed a game, and a lot of Seahawks fans were hoping that perhaps that the other wide receiver, Brandon Ayuk, who spent a lot of training camp in a holdout, the 49ers don't have a single touchdown throw to either Deebo Samuel or to Brandon Ayuk. And so you would think that Brock Purdy suddenly has just kind of fallen into a hole. Instead, he is actually playing really good football. Juwan Jennings actually leads San Francisco's wide receiver core in terms of receptions, receiving yards, 3 touchdowns, tied for George Kittle for the most on this squad. So again, I think you have to kind of take a step back and recognize that Seattle remains in first place for all the, woe is me problems that Seattle has. They are still in first place. And still, this is a 49ers squad that feels vulnerable, but they are very, very different in that who is actually catching the ball and creating those tackles. They're still playing at a high level. They should have beat the Arizona Cardinals a couple of days ago, just like the Seahawks should have beat the New York Giants yesterday. But at the same time, I think that if the Seahawks don't strap them up and are ready to play on Thursday Night Football, then certainly the San Francisco 49ers, the same way they have for years, whether it be Christian McCaffrey, Deebo Samuel, or Eric Armstead, or any of the other players that no longer are on their squad, if the Seahawks don't buckle up their chin straps, they're going to get beat all over again.
Yeah, this is still a dangerous opponent, and Fred Warner in the middle, you still got to deal with him. There's some questions in the secondary. Defensive line with Hargrave being out and losing players like Chase Young in free agency, Javon Kinlaw's with the Jets now. There's been a lot of changes in that defensive line, and they don't have the depth or the overall talent that they have had there, but you still got to worry about Nick Bosa. You still got to worry about Fred Warner with his blitzing ability. There's still some playmakers. Leonard Floyd can get after it. He's got a really long track record of being really good against the Seattle Seahawks all those years when he was with the Rams. So there's still plenty of talent on this side of the football. You better show up for this football game or you are going to be ran out of your building. It is not going to be like the game yesterday where you had a fighting chance to win or at least tie the game late. That opportunity is not going to be there if you play like you did the other night against this 49ers team that still has a lot of talent. And you mentioned some of those departures or additions. As far as this team goes, again, the injuries that they've had, players like Christian McCaffrey being out, Javon Hargrave done for the year, John Feliciano's not playing. I want to take a moment to highlight some of the young players. Unfortunately, they have not had to have Ricky Pearsall out there in the field yet because unfortunately he was shot and he's, fortunately he is alive. He's going to be able to play again, but he has not played yet for the 49ers for that reason. But two of their other rookies, Dominic Pooney, who we talked about a lot in the pre-draft process. I loved him coming out of Kansas. He's come in and been a plug-and-play starter at guard for the 49ers. He's playing at a really high level. He might be an all-rookie team candidate. He's off to a great start. And then in the secondary with some of the injuries they've had at safety, Malik Mustafa is playing a lot of snaps for the 49ers, a player that you and I were both high on coming out of Wake Forest. So while they're 2-3, they've had some injuries. They do have a few promising young players that are getting valuable experience and playing well for them on offense and defense right now.
No question about it. And that's the thing is you now have to target these players. I mean, Dominic Pooney is a good football player. He also was a left tackle previously. Now he's playing at that right guard position. Look, he does have great feet for a guard. He plays with some physicality, but you can get under him and be able to push him back. That to me is going to be one of the priorities here is the Seattle's interior run defenders who, as you mentioned before, I thought they played reasonably well against the Giants, better than the statistics might suggest. I think that there's opportunities there. And Malik Mustafa, he can be a striker. He also can be a slipper. He can be somebody who will miss an occasional tackle. So that's the thing. That's what I did not see from the Seahawks in their pass catchers and their running running backs, frankly, against the Giants. They didn't miss tackles very much. They basically went down to first contact, where basically it felt like everybody in the Giants squad was able to slip tackles consistently. That's where Seattle's got to kind of regain that momentum and be the team that is able to be the more aggressive squad that's going to be able to create some tackles or create some plays after the hit. And that is, I think, is going to be the deciding factor in this game against the 49ers on Thursday night.
As always, you can follow me on X and Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Programming alert for those of you that want more Seahawks insight, even talking some Kraken and other local teams. I'll be joining Fox 13 for their Washington Sports Wrap tonight at 7:30 Pacific time. So make sure you're listening to that. And we've got Matchup Wednesday moving to Tuesday because of the short week. So we got some Matchup Tuesday coming up tomorrow. Make sure that you are listening into that episode. Thanks for tuning in. Enjoy the rest of your Monday night. Go Hawks.